So today, Kat Guerrero and Lindsay Carroll will be sharing their project, which is entitled Reframe Sustain, Designing an Open Source Platform for Sustainability and Capacity Building.
Perfect. Cool. Thank you for those kind words, Samantha, and good morning. We're going to start off the day with a few questions, and stick with me here. They're a little bit different. Did you wash your hair this morning? Did you notice what your shampoo was packaged in? Will that packaging be disposed of incorrectly and potentially find its way to the ocean, breaking down into microplastics? Do you know the safety of the ingredients in your shampoo and where they head once they go down the drain? Do they biodegrade or do they end up in ecosystems, potentially accumulating in marine life? Think about the last time you went shopping. You may have noticed a proliferation of labels and one-liners that range from certified B Corp to climate neutral to 50% recycled plastic and so on. Or better yet, heavily marketed goals of becoming net zero by 2000 and something. Public statements that are environment-centric are on the rise. And according to surveys, 77% of Americans are concerned about the environmental impacts of the products they buy. But the science shows little progress against environmental issues, regardless of these public-facing commitments and certifications.
Before we dive deeply into the sustainability landscape, let's start with a basic understanding of what this phrase means. Keep this definition in mind as we take you through the rest of our project. Sustainable. 1, capable of being sustained, and 2, of, relating to, or being a method of harvesting or using a resource so that the resource is not depleted or permanently damaged. Despite an increase in companies making claims on sustainability, there's been little measurable action, suggesting they aren't in line with this definition. Emissions continue, and biodiversity loss is increasing at an alarming rate.
Wait for it. Teamwork.
For companies to take an authentic stake in their role of operating responsibly, they need to have a collective understanding behind the science of environmental change. The 5 circles on the screen represent the drivers of biodiversity loss and ecosystem change as reported by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, or IPES for short. Let's take a look at some examples. The first circle is climate change. Future impacts of climate change are projected to become more pronounced in the next decades. And while existing targets aim to avoid more devastating changes, it's unclear if we'll actually meet those goals. Regarding land use and sea use change, 75% of the land has been significantly altered, and 85% of wetlands have been lost. On pollution, marine plastics have increased tenfold since the 1980s. Greenhouse gas emissions, untreated waste, pollutants from commercial activities, and toxic dumping have had a strong negative effect on our soils, water, and atmosphere. These changes are heavily driven by our environmental or economic relationship with the environment that has assumed an endless supply of resources. Given this relationship, it's largely on companies to make better decisions. With companies failing to deliver action, we set out to understand the disconnect between companies' claims of sustainability and the measurable science that shows we're still very unsustainable. In our careers, we've both been in positions to observe how companies consider their environmental and social impacts. My background has been in financial services consulting, most recently focused on how banks and private equity groups consider their finance footprint, meaning when they decide to provide a company with funds, how do they consider that company's outward impacts? Trust me when I say we have a very long way to go. The dialogue happening amongst financial and business groups usually doesn't reflect what I've learned here at Scripps. As an insider to those conversations, and now armed with this greater understanding, I really felt it was important to create a platform to reframe the conversation.
Throughout my consulting work, primarily in the creative industry, it's often paralleled sustainability initiatives. I've seen founders that are excited about aligning with sustainability goals in theory, but when it comes to practice, they don't really know where to go, how to start, or the amount of time it truly takes to evolve. I've also seen companies that are purely attracted to achieving X certification for publicity purposes or market differentiation. And once they meet that mark, they allow the marketing department to put a creative spin on that work, and that results in greenwashing and a lack of traceable change. Collectively, with our backgrounds, we recognize the need for a more comprehensive guide for how companies should approach environmentally aligned goals. Existing websites and sources are fragmented and often dense to the point of misunderstanding. This conversation is incredibly timely, and it's still evolving. We wanted to recognize key challenges and use this information to create a platform that disseminates knowledge in a way that feels both rooted in fact and research, but also approachable. Our leading question throughout this process was, how can we empower companies to have integrity and long-term vision in their sustainability work? So, we stepped in to create that resource we felt was missing. Our website, Reframe Sustain, establishes a clear, compelling, and factual case for why companies should be considering both climate and biodiversity and transforming their business models. Through useful guidance on how to apply these considerations, this website is a valuable resource for those that are interested in becoming more sustainable, but need to be pointed to the right direction. Reframe Sustain helps companies grapple with sustainability in a larger sense, including biodiversity and ecosystem impacts, rather than just looking at their carbon footprint. Some of our content is geared towards specific industries, while other pieces can be broadly applied.
The methodology we used to develop the materials for our site centered around 3 avenues of research. First, the review of publicly available sustainability reports. Second, the review of case studies and published papers. And third, interviews with individuals working within this space. Our review of sustainability reports focused on understanding how different companies identified which areas to focus on, what types of targets are they setting, and what actions are they actually using to address those targets. As part of our literature review, we looked at overarching reports from the IPCC and IPBES as the basis of environmental concern, and assessed papers looking at corporate responsibility, transparency, and employee engagement. We reviewed existing framework documents from various organizations like the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and Science Based Target Network to incorporate and link to their recommendations when appropriate. Case studies, summaries from consulting firms, and reports from various NGOs or watchdog groups serve to identify varying perspectives.
In order to accurately inform our work, we also wanted to talk to those that are on the ground. We interviewed 20 individuals to understand how they approach sustainability and biodiversity considerations. These range from consultants to sustainability leads at companies to individuals working for supporting nonprofits, and those creating the software and data collection either currently being used to assess footprints or are in works to be released. We also collaborated with a master's student, Sophie Badarf at ECSP, who we found on LinkedIn, who's interviewing companies in Europe to understand approaches and challenges to setting and actioning climate and biodiversity-focused targets. Through our compared research, we gained a broader perspective from 7 other companies not listed on the slide, included Danone, LVMH, and Carroll. All our interviews were nuanced and insightful. Some of them created space for folks that aren't really listened to really take time to, what's the right way to phrase it? Talk a lot without us asking questions because they're so passionate about these issues and they're often not heard in the capacity they want to be. An example of a great interview was with the head of sustainability at 7th Generation, a household product company. We discuss everything from the importance of a company's strategy and ensuring it takes into consideration what they know about their company versus what the science says, the use of coalitions for companies to work with their common supply chain, as well as advocate for relevant environmental and social policies, and the importance of ensuring products are just safe for both the environment and humans. Through our interviews, we were able to affirm that individuals working in the space really felt there was a need for our project. Interviewers thought that a scientific understanding of the environment was lacking in the business world. They also largely agreed that many companies focus on visible issues and don't always drill into a deeper understanding of their footprint. With this feedback in mind, we found our website was directly in alignment with what leaders in the space wanted to see. We wanted to share a few highlights from these interviews. Note that these are not original clips. They've been recorded separately for interviewee confidentiality.
From what I've seen, people aren't really measuring biodiversity. It's really hard with their supply chain. No one knows their impact. But it's definitely becoming a priority. There's way more awareness from consumer pressure and consumer demand.
Humankind would not exist. It wouldn't thrive if the environment was different. Business is a human construct. It exists at the pleasure and convenience of society and not the other way around. Benefiting humankind is necessary for humankind to survive, and even to equate them is not proper.
As consumers, we have no idea of the social and environmental impacts of what we buy. Our goal has been to develop a label for our products that communicates this, just like a nutrition label. We are sharing this label methodology with other companies to encourage transparency.
You can't have circularity if you're pumping CO2 out of the ground. Sustainability plans and targets need to be ambitious and connected to the employees across the company. They should push everyone to make better and more informed decisions. This is the only way we can really move forward and be a better company.
It's in the company's best interest to know what's in their supply chain and what's going on. Speak your supplier's language and visit in person. Have a direct conversation with them. Self-assessment has its pros and cons, but the best way to fact check is to ask their workers.
A lot of the existing focus is how do we convince consumers we are doing good stuff? We need to avoid the rhetoric on quick wins and measure the right thing by the end of the decade and create a robust plan to address it.
To have a sustainable product, it needs to be regenerative. And how do you determine if a system is truly regenerative?
From what I've seen, people
You might have recognized some of our voiceover actors that are in the room right now. So based on those insights, we developed the following website framework. The first section seeks to highlight why companies need to proactively address their environmental footprint. It educates visitors on key findings from the IPCC and IPBES and how their companies may be negatively contributing. The next section speaks to the how, meaning how can a company build a thorough plan to address their impacts and start taking action. We started creating user journeys where an individual would select their company's progress. Based on that response, they're taken to pages with specific next steps that can help move them forward. We also created an action plan section that provides guidance on industry-specific concerns. The initial industry section we created was focused on the household and personal products sector due to its everyday presence in most people's lives and consumer demand for more sustainable products. And lastly, we created sections focusing on ensuring companies have appropriate support to make their plan successful. This includes guidance and case studies on how to effectively engage employees and customers, as well as how coalitions can be useful to tackle supply chain challenges and push for environmental policies.
We're sharing a lot of information on this platform and recognize that even though we're simplifying a lot of these convoluted topics, it's still pretty dense, especially for our target audience who has a lot on their plate in addition to just sustainability work. To break up text and remind visitors of the importance of this work, we integrated visuals like these, highlighting the ecosystems that drive many of us to fight for more responsible actions. As you navigate our site later, hopefully, you may come across some pictures of our committee members and classmates. Rather than tell you, we thought it would be better to show you how this website would work. Let's take a look at Reframe Sustain from a company's point of view. Let's say you produce household cleaning products. Over the course of your operations, you've started donating X% of your earnings to a local nonprofit. You recognize that while it's good to support local initiatives, you just haven't done enough to internally assess your footprint. You've noticed some employees are disgruntled from the lack of sustainability within the business. Customers are curious about your environmental practices. They're asking for some transparency because while they like your product, they want to know what impact it has. You find our site, Reframe Sustain, and when you're viewing the sustainability maturity spectrum, you identify as just starting out. You realize that you need to redefine your mission statement and seek mentorship from like-minded companies, as well as develop an internal team dedicated to ensuring sustainability initiatives are woven into the day-to-day. You also realize you need to just better understand your impacts. Wait for it. With this in mind, you navigate to our materialities assessment page to understand how you can best approach your areas of impact. We felt it was critical to include this page as a materiality assessment helps a company identify areas of high priority from which their strategy is developed. At the top, you'll see an observation from IPBES that more and more companies are making claims of sustainable actions, but there's little evidence of improvement to the natural world. This is relevant because evidence from our research showed that companies are including the wrong considerations when performing their materiality assessments, which can impact the areas of focus. As you navigate this website, you'll see a clear explanation of the link between materiality assessments and company strategy, and then begin to dig into areas of our research and the observations that inform this page. In our interviews, we found that companies often develop their sustainability strategies based on whether an area of impact has or where it's expected to impact the company financially. Say, for example, a carbon tax. Think back to that initial definition of sustainability. The approach many companies are taking to develop their strategy just isn't aligned. It doesn't ensure companies are focused on their highest outward impacts. It places a high level of reliance on stakeholder opinions. It assumes that resources will be available in perpetuity, ignoring our planetary boundaries. It's also just not connected to that concept of sustainability. It's more of a business resilience exercise.
We then explain the approach that aligns with that definition of sustainable, focusing first and foremost on the areas of highest and most urgent outward impact, and then, as a secondary consideration, taking those areas of financial concern and adding those to the list of priorities. To support this concept, there's a case study from the shipping company Maersk. Taking the financial perspective, only climate change from the environmental category was a high priority issue. But Maersk also looks at outward impacts and identifies ecosystem and biodiversity, pollution, and ship recycling as high priority areas as well. This example is useful for you as a household products company, and you understand the importance of focusing outward. You then provide guidance for how companies should look across their product lifecycle and value chains to identify areas of impact. We frame this approach and other content on our site around the 5 drivers of biodiversity loss, as well as social and human health, to help ensure companies are looking across impact categories rather than focusing only on those that are most visible. At the end of this section, you should feel empowered to dig deeper into your impacts, not just focusing on areas of financial impact or surface level claims that will grab the attention of consumers. As a household products company, you then take a look at our action plan section, honing in on the section titled Harmful Ingredients, realizing you hadn't considered the impacts of some of the chemicals and compounds used within your formulas. While the EU has banned over 1,300 chemicals from personal products, the US has only banned a handful. It's worth taking a critical look at what you're using and understanding how some of those common ingredients can impact human health. This includes endocrine disruption, cancer, etc. But the impacts don't stop there. Going back to our shampoo scenario at the beginning of this presentation, what happens when those ingredients go down the drain? Are they easily removed from wastewater, or do they get released back into nature, impacting the quality of that ecosystem and potentially bioaccumulating in marine life? What about the air? Certain ingredients in products are considered volatile organic compounds, which means they evaporate quickly at room temperature, reacting to form air pollutants. Additionally, select chemicals within those products can accumulate in sediments, impacting animals that forage in those areas for food, and then accumulating throughout the food chain and possibly ending up on our plates. To help guide companies thinking through their product ingredients, we created a list of companies to consider. For example, does the ingredient accumulate within the tissues of those that are exposed to it? Does it easily biodegrade, or is it persistent in the environment? As you explore this section of our site, you find case studies that show a range of examples of how ingredients can impact people and the environment. If you're that household products company, we intend for this page to push you forward, to take a hard look at your formulas and make changes that ensure your products are safe for both your users and the environment.
A few key employees have brought up ideas on introducing alternative packaging materials and streamlining your supply chain. You love their enthusiasm, but realize your other employees are still lagging on buy-in. They don't seem to have the knowledge base to make more sustainable decisions and don't see shifting practices as a priority. You head to the stakeholder engagement page to best figure out the best way to engage your employees and the rest of the team and develop a system where everyone feels fully engaged in transitioning to more environmentally friendly practices. Throughout our research, all our interviewees brought up the importance of employee buy-in across an organization as the key element to sustaining internal shifts. For you, this looks like defining an internal team and ensuring representation from the areas of your company that interface with your highest environmental and social impacts. You see the case study of MasterCard, linking all employee compensation to sustainability targets. You realize that this will help ingrain environmental focus within your employees and align your compensation system to reflect progress on sustainability goals. This was a recommendation directly developed from our interviews. So you've since redeveloped your company's new focus and based on our guidance, created a program that includes education, innovation workshops, and facilitating discussions on a monthly basis based on what your employees would like to see. Now that you have your internal framework in place, you'd like to get involved with relevant coalitions as a support system focused on the same goals. Through our content, you note what groups operate within your industry and are working on supporting environmentally and socially forward policies. There's a number of coalitions currently existing to tackle multiple issues. An example you see is the Outdoor Industry Association focusing on decarbonization. Based on your sustainability goals, the Sustainable Packaging Coalition seems like the best fit. Using our recommendations as the guidelines, you begin to engage with this coalition while you work to shift your packaging internally, among the other actions you've identified while going through Reframe Sustain. Now that you've seen some of our website and put yourself in the shoes of a company that might use it and how they would use it, here's what's next for us. We're in the process of sharing our site with our interviewees to get their feedback on what we've created. From then, we hope they'll use it and potentially disseminate within their networks as well as our own. We've registered this project as a capacity building support through IPBES, as it aligns directly with their completed assessments. We plan to continue adding content to the site, including sections on life cycle assessments and supplier engagements. This will be an ongoing project for Lindsay and I. We'll also expand this action plan sections to include additional industries, and we're planning on looking at textiles next.
Reframe Sustain aims to remind companies that they must exist within the confines of our natural environment. Our social and economic structures cannot exist beyond the boundaries of nature. We intend for this resource to empower companies to take ownership of their actions, shifting our relationship with climate and biodiversity. Many thanks to our amazing committee for their help and support during this project. Matt Costa and Mel Bender, our terrific co-chairs, and Corey Gabriel, John O'Niles, and Patrick Cage. We invite you all to check out our site, reframesustain.com, and let us know your thoughts. Thank you.
And if there's any questions, we'd love to answer them. Oh, sorry. Awkward.
Just a shouter. Okay. How did you select the people or the companies for your interviews? Was it based on who they were, availability? I'm just interested in that process.
Both. We wanted to target a different range of folks. Like we mentioned earlier, we wanted to find people that are actually in sustainability lead positions, find folks that do it as part of their job, but it's not their main responsibility, as well as connect with supporting nonprofits, as well as the companies that are creating a lot of this data collection software. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just add that we worked heavily through our existing networks, including looking through kind of mining through LinkedIn to see who had gone to UCSD, who had gone to our respective undergrad colleges to kind of make sure we had an initial in, which really helped us kind of get and connect to people.
How was it working as a team versus just by yourself? How did you delegate or split up the work that was done? Because it really sounded like a lot of work that you were doing, interviewing people and doing literary reviews and all of those things.
I'd say it was great working as a team. A lot of these concepts are pretty conceptual, so having someone to kind of talk through what we think is most important and kind of go through our interview notes and pull out what we think is relevant versus what kind of seems less relevant. I'm saying that nicely. Was really great. And then we split up the work by kind of each getting attracted to different sections. I was really invested in coalitions as a model for pushing forward action, as well as the employee and consumer engagement. We worked together on the making the case for change, and Lindsay dug so deep into materiality, as well as we collaborated on strategy and targets. So we kind of went our own ways, but came together and acted as a resource for each other.
Yeah, and then within our action plan specific to household and consumer products, within the demo we only went through one, but we also went deep on palm oil, consumer use of products, and packaging, and so we sort of split those up as well.
Great presentation. I actually was curious about that word materiality. I'm not from the business world, so I'm not sure exactly what that means. Can you explain it?
Lindsay, time to shine.
Yeah, so companies actually use the materiality concept to figure out what they should be reporting within their financial statements or disclosures. And so it kind of comes from that world and has been shifted over, and there's multiple different sustainability disclosure organizations that have created methodologies for how companies should approach what they're disclosing to investors. So that's where it comes from.
Yeah, and essentially it's just a fancy word for what do you prioritize?
Exactly.
Like what's
Yeah.
important to you. Yep.
Hello. So I've got a question from the internet. Based on your research, where and how do you expect the sustainability landscape to evolve in the future?
Great question, internet. I think it really needs to kind of condense and get on the same page. There's so many different routes of assessing your footprint in different bodies that it's really just all over the place. So it's not that useful, I think, in my opinion. So I hope to see it kind of condense and join forces. So it's more just like as a usable, what am I trying to say? Help.
A usable,
I just want to see it condense and become more streamlined almost, because right now it's all over the place and it feels confusing to companies and individuals in this space.
I'll just ask a follow-on to that. Does it feel like, are these actions taken by corporations, are they moving the needle? Does it matter?
So going back to that statement by IPES, I mean, it doesn't seem to suggest like the needle has been moved much, which is sort of what we kind of framed a lot of our research on, kind of digging into that. Especially when it comes to the biodiversity side of things, that feels like it hasn't really been thought about. In a lot of our interviews, people said they're interested in it, they want to expand to it, but they're not sure how. And I think for some companies, we haven't seen the mark move on carbon because they're late to the game, they haven't started yet. So it's, from all of our conversations, people in the space seemed really positive and felt like things like the potential requirement for companies to disclose on carbon would really push forward. But yeah, I would say that it seems like it hasn't moved as much as marketing might say it has.
And they love to say it has.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what do you think is the disconnect for those companies that are not focusing on biodiversity?
I think a lack of understanding of what it means to incorporate biodiversity into their operations.
Yeah, I would add that also, I think one of the main problems is how long these companies' supply chains are and how invisible impacts are. I mean, when we buy a product, we don't see the deforestation that the ingredient within that product might have caused. It's pretty invisible to us. So as consumers and as companies, it seems to be, just not up in front because it's happening somewhere else. So I think that's one of the main disconnects.
How are you planning to get this resource in front of the right people? How do you make sure people see it and that they can use it?
Great question. We have a little bit more work to do on the website. It's not exactly where we want it to be yet, just due to some background coding stuff that we don't have the capacity for until next week. So after we kind of refine that, we're going to circulate it within our networks, and then with all our interviewees, who most of them have offered to kind of put it within their circles. So we hope it's going to be a compounding effect.
Yeah, and also just, we did add, we registered it as, through IPES as capacity building support. So hoping that helps contribute to its momentum.
Yeah, additionally, we plan to send it to a lot of those coalitions that we've connected with because they have their own networks as well.